The concrete cracked like thunder as the sledgehammer struck. Sarah Martinez wiped sweat from her brow, staring at the demolished remains of her backyard pool, the same pool where her neighbor Karen had slipped just 3 months ago, claiming a life-altering injury that netted her $200,000 in insurance money. But Sarah had security footage Karen didn't know about. And tonight, Karen was about to discover that some secrets refused to stay buried beneath the rubble. Part 1. The perfect plan. The morning sun cast long shadows across Sarah Martinez's backyard as she stood knee-deep in what used to be her dream pool. 3 months of legal hell had led to this moment, sledgehammer in hand, surrounded by chunks of concrete and twisted rebar that told the story of her financial ruin. "You sure about this, Sarah?" Her brother Miguel called from the deck, nursing his coffee and watching her methodical destruction with concern etched across his weathered face. "That pool cost you 40 grand to install." Sarah swung the hammer. Again, sending another satisfying crack through the concrete. "And it's about to cost me a hell of a lot more if I don't get rid of it." She paused, wiping perspiration from her forehead with the back of her work glove. Karen's lawyers are circling like vultures. They want to bring in some fancy expert to examine the hazardous surface conditions that supposedly caused her injury. The injury. Sarah's jaw clenched at the memory of that December afternoon when Karen Whitmore had appeared at her front door, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, claiming she'd slipped on the pool deck during her morning jog. Never. Mind that Sarah had never given Karen permission to use her backyard as a running track. Never mind that Karen had been wearing designer stilettos, hardly jogging attire. "The settlement offer came in yesterday," Sarah continued, her voice tight, with barely controlled rage. $200,000. "My insurance company wants me to take it rather than fight it in court." Miguel nearly choked on his coffee. 200 grand. For a slip and fall? What's she claiming? Permanent disability? Herniated discs? Chronic pain syndrome? Loss of enjoyment of life? Sarah's voice dripped with sarcasm as she recited the medical terminology from the legal documents. According to her doctor, she'll never be able to garden, play tennis, or pursue her active lifestyle again. Bull. Miguel set down his mug and climbed down into the pool crater beside his sister. "I saw Karen at the country club last week. She was playing doubles with the Morrison twins and moving just fine." Sarah's eyes sharpened. "You saw her playing tennis? When?" "Tuesday morning. She was serving overhand, diving for shots, looked perfectly healthy to me." Miguel picked up a smaller piece of concrete and hurled it toward the growing pile. "Why? Does that matter?" Before Sarah could answer, a familiar voice called out from the fence line. "Sarah. Oh, Sarah, darling." Both siblings turned to see Karen Whitmore approaching their gate, moving with the exaggerated, careful step she'd adopted since her supposed injury. At 52, Karen maintained her appearance with the dedication of a woman who'd never worked a day in her life, courtesy of 3 successive husbands' generous divorce settlements. Today, she wore a flowing white sundress and oversized sunglasses, carrying what appeared to be a casserole dish. "I brought you some of my famous tuna noodle casserole," Karen called out sweetly, her voice carrying that particular saccharine. Tone she reserved for neighbors she was actively suing. "I thought you might be too busy with all this construction to cook properly." Sarah climbed out of the pool crater, brushing concrete dust from her jeans. Every instinct screamed at her to tell Karen exactly where she could put her casserole, but she forced a polite smile. "That's very thoughtful of you, Karen. Though I have to ask, should you be carrying heavy dishes? I mean, with your condition and all." A flicker of something, annoyance, calculation, crossed Karen's face before the mask of injured innocence slipped back into place. "Oh, well, I have good days and bad days. The doctor says I should try to maintain some normalcy, even though the pain never really goes away." She pressed her free hand to her lower back with theatrical precision. "I do hope this pool removal isn't too disruptive to the neighborhood. The noise has been challenging for someone in my delicate state." Miguel moved to stand beside his sister, his presence a solid wall of support. "Funny thing, Karen. I could have sworn I saw you at the country club this week, playing tennis." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Karen's grip tightened on the casserole dish, and Sarah caught the slight tremor in her hands. Not pain, but fear. "I think you must be mistaken," Karen said carefully. "I haven't played tennis since Well, since the accident. The doctors have been very clear about my limitations. Have they? Sarah stepped closer, studying Karen's face with new intensity. Because according to your deposition, you can barely walk to the mailbox without experiencing excruciating pain. Yet here you are, hand-delivering casseroles. It's just across the yard, Karen protested, but her voice had lost its confident edge. And I wanted to be neighborly. Despite everything that's happened, I don't want there to be any hard feelings between us. The audacity of it hit Sarah like a physical blow. Here was the woman who'd sued her for $250,000, standing in her yard making small talk while Sarah literally tore apart her backyard to avoid financial ruin. Hard feelings didn't begin to cover it. No hard feelings at all. Sarah said, her tone carefully neutral. Though I am curious about something. That morning when you had your accident, what were you doing in my backyard in the first place? Karen's rehearsed answer came too quickly. I was jogging, as I told. The investigators. I use the neighborhood streets for my morning exercise routine, and I cut through your yard to avoid the construction on Maple Street. The gate was open, and I assumed it would be fine. In December. In stilettos. They weren't stilettos. They were athletic shoes with a slight heel. Very fashionable workout gear. Sarah nodded slowly, filing away every word. Of course. Well, I should let you get back home. This heat can't be good for someone recovering from such serious injuries. Karen's smile stretched too wide. You're absolutely right. The heat does make the pain worse. I should get inside and rest. She thrust the casserole dish toward Sarah. I do hope you'll try this. It's an old family recipe. As Karen carefully made her way back across the yard, favoring her left leg just enough to be noticeable, Sarah watched every step. The performance was good. Karen had clearly practiced, but there were tells. The way she forgot to limp when she thought no one was looking. The unconscious straight posture when she was focused on something else. The absence of any real protective body language around her supposedly injured spine. She's lying, Miguel said quietly once Karen was out of earshot. Oh, she's definitely lying. Sarah set the casserole dish on her deck table without looking at it. The question is how to prove it. What about the security cameras? Don't you have footage of the morning she says she got hurt? Sarah's expression darkened. That's the thing, Miguel. I do have footage. And it doesn't show what Karen claims happened at all. Miguel's eyebrows shot up. What do you mean? I mean Karen never slipped on my pool deck. She never fell at all. The footage shows her walking around my pool, looking at something, then deliberately lying down on the concrete and staying there for several minutes before getting up and leaving. 20 minutes later, she's back with witnesses, claiming she just fell. The words hung in the air between them like a lit fuse. Miguel stared at her in shock. You're saying she staged the whole thing? I'm saying the security footage tells a very different story than her lawsuit. Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking with anger. She scouted my property, planned her performance, and then came back to execute it. This wasn't an accident, Miguel. It was fraud. Jesus, Sarah, have you shown this to your lawyer? That's where it gets complicated. Sarah picked up her sledgehammer again, needing something to do with her hands. The camera angle doesn't clearly show her face. My attorney says a good defense. Lawyer could argue it's someone else, or that the timestamp is wrong, or a dozen other things. It's not the smoking gun we need. So what are you going to do? Sarah hefted the hammer, staring at the remaining chunks of her expensive pool. I'm going to give Karen exactly what she wants. I'm going to let her think she's won. She met her brother's confused gaze with a smile that held no warmth. And then I'm going to prove she's a fraud in a way that even her fancy lawyers can't explain away. How? By getting her to do it again. The plan was taking shape in Sarah's mind even as she spoke. Karen's greed had gotten her this far, and greed would be her downfall. People who committed insurance fraud once rarely stopped at once. They got bolder, more confident, more careless. And Karen had just made a crucial mistake by showing up here today, playing the victim while simultaneously scouting for her next opportunity. Sarah, that sounds dangerous. If she's already committed fraud once, then she'll do it again, especially if she thinks she's found the perfect mark. Sarah's grip tightened on the hammer handle. Karen doesn't know about the security footage. She thinks she pulled off the perfect crime. That makes her confident, and confident criminals make mistakes. As if summoned by their conversation, Karen. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat in her lawyer's office, watching David Chen shuffle through depositions with the weary expression of a man who'd seen too many frivolous lawsuits to maintain any faith in justice. At 38, David had built his practice defending insurance companies against fraud, but even he seemed daunted by Karen's meticulously crafted case. The medical records are extensive, David said, sliding a thick folder across his mahogany desk. 3 different specialists, all confirming herniated discs consistent with a fall. MRI scans, physical therapy records, pain management consultations. If she's faking this, she's doing it with Oscar-worthy commitment. Sarah opened the folder, her jaw tightening as she scanned the medical reports. Each document painted Karen as a woman whose life had been devastated by a simple slip and fall. Chronic pain ratings of 8 out of 10. Inability to lift more than 5 pounds. Severe limitations on mobility and daily activities. What about the security footage I gave you? David's expression grew uncomfortable. Sarah, I've looked at it a dozen times. Yes, the timestamp suggests she was on your property that morning. Yes, her behavior seems unusual. But the image quality isn't clear enough to definitively identify her face, and the angle doesn't show the actual fall. A good defense attorney will tear it apart. So we just let her walk away with $200,000. The settlement offer is still on the table. Your insurance company is strongly advising you to take it. Fighting this in court could cost twice that amount in legal fees, and there's no guarantee we'd win. Sarah closed the folder with more force than necessary. What if I could get better evidence? David's eyes sharpened. What kind of evidence? The kind that would be impossible to explain away. Sarah, I need to be very clear about something. If you're thinking of doing anything that could be construed as harassment or illegal surveillance, nothing illegal, Sarah interrupted. Just good old-fashioned due diligence. David studied her face for a long moment. What aren't you telling me? Sarah stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced calm. I'm telling you that Karen Whitmore is a fraud, and I'm going to prove it. The question is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. That's not how the legal system works, Sarah. We can't just. The legal system is exactly how Karen is stealing from me. Sarah's voice remained steady, but steel crept into her tone. She's using your rules, your procedures, your professional courtesy to commit theft. Maybe it's time someone used those same rules against her. 20 minutes later, Sarah pulled into her driveway to find her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, waiting by her mailbox with the eager expression of someone bursting with gossip. Sarah, dear, I hope you don't mind me saying, but I couldn't help overhearing your conversation with that Whitmore woman yesterday. Mrs. Patterson glanced around conspiratorially before leaning closer. There's something you should know about her. What's that, Mrs. Patterson? She's done this before. Sarah's pulse quickened. What do you mean? 3 years ago, before you moved in, she sued the Hendersons who lived in your house for a slip and fall on their front steps. Claimed she was delivering a casserole, just like yesterday, and tripped on a loose brick. Got $15,000 out of their homeowners insurance. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Karen's casserole delivery wasn't neighborly kindness, it was reconnaissance. She was already planning her next fraud. Did the Hendersons fight it? Mrs. Patterson shook her head sadly. They were an elderly couple, scared of going to court. They took the settlement and moved to Florida within 6 months. I always wondered if the stress contributed to Mr. Henderson's heart attack. Rage burned in Sarah's chest, but she kept her voice level. Mrs. Patterson, would you be willing to testify to that if needed? Absolutely, dear. That woman is a menace to the neighborhood. Someone needs to stop her before she ruins another family. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, diving deep into public records and social media. If Karen was a serial insurance fraudster, there would be traces. It took 4 hours of searching, but she found them. Karen Whitmore had lived in 5 different cities over the past 15 years. In each location, She'd filed at least one premises liability claim against neighbors or local businesses. A slip in a grocery store parking lot in Phoenix. A trip on uneven pavement outside a restaurant in Denver. A fall down a homeowner's front steps in Austin. The same story she'd used on the Hendersons. Each settlement had been modest enough to avoid serious scrutiny, between $10,000 and $20,000, but together they painted a clear pattern. Karen wasn't just an opportunistic fraud, she was a professional. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. Found something. Can you meet me at Murphy's Bar in 20 minutes? Murphy's was a dive bar 3 blocks from the country club, the kind of place where construction workers and housekeepers grab drinks after serving the wealthy members all day. Sarah found Miguel in a corner booth, nursing a beer and looking pleased with himself. I've been asking around about Karen, he said without preamble. Turns out she's got quite a reputation among the country club staff. Sarah slid into the booth across from him. What kind of reputation? The kind that involves staging accidents. For money. Miguel lowered his voice. I talked to a guy named Tommy who works maintenance at the club. 2 years ago, Karen claimed she slipped on a wet floor near the pool and hurt her back. Club settled for 20 grand rather than fight it. Jesus. How many times has she done this? Tommy thinks at least 3 times at the club alone. Different incidents, different injuries, always just serious enough to warrant a settlement, but not serious enough to require surgery or extensive treatment. Sarah felt the familiar rage building in her chest, so she's been perfecting her technique. Gets better. Tommy says Karen was asking questions about your pool last month. Wanted to know about the deck material, whether you had slip-resistant coating, if there had been any other accidents. She was casing the joint. That's what Tommy thinks. He says she does this thing where she befriends homeowners, learns about their property, then finds a way to have an accident that can't be easily disproven. Sarah stared into her untouched beer, her mind racing. Miguel, what if we could catch her in the act? What do you mean? I mean, what if we gave her an opportunity she couldn't resist? Something that looked like easy money but was actually a trap. Miguel's expression grew wary. Sarah, that sounds like entrapment. Not entrapment. Just providing her with the same opportunity she provided herself. Sarah leaned forward, her voice intense. Think about it. She's already established a pattern of targeting neighbors with attractive properties. What if we made my property irresistible? How? By giving her exactly what a professional fraudster looks for, a wealthy target, an obvious hazard, and the perfect setup for a slip and fall. Sarah's plan took shape over the next hour. She would renovate her backyard, creating what appeared to be an expensive outdoor entertainment area with multiple potential hazards. Smooth stone pathways, decorative water features, elevation changes that could cause trips and falls. To Karen, it would look like a target-rich environment. But Sarah would be ready this time. Professional-grade security cameras with facial recognition, motion sensors, audio recording. She would document every moment of Karen's property surveillance and, eventually, her fraudulent fall. You're talking about spending a lot of money to catch someone who's already stolen from you, Miguel pointed out. I'm talking about spending money to stop someone who's been stealing from people for years. Sarah's voice carried a conviction that surprised even her. Mrs. Patterson told me Karen's fraud might have contributed to an old man's heart attack. How many other families has she destroyed? How many people have paid settlements rather than fight because they couldn't afford the legal fees? Miguel studied his sister's face. This isn't just about your $200,000 and more, is it? No, it's about justice. They were interrupted by Tommy, the maintenance worker from the country club, who'd been quietly drinking at the bar. He approached their table with the hesitant air of someone who wanted to help but wasn't sure if he should get involved. Excuse me, he said quietly. I couldn't help overhearing. You're talking about Karen Whitmore. Sarah nodded. Miguel says, you've had experience with her. Tommy glanced around nervously before sliding into their booth. Look, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but that woman is poison. She's cost the club almost 100 grand over the years with her bullshit claims. Then why don't they ban her? Because she's smart. She spaces out her incidents, never does anything too obvious, and she's got lawyers who know exactly how to make fighting her more expensive than paying her off. Tommy's voice carried years of frustration. But here's the thing, she's getting careless. Sarah's attention sharpened. What do you mean? Last month, she was at the club complaining about her back injury from your pool. Real dramatic, making a big show of how much pain she was in. But I saw her later that same day in the parking lot, loading heavy golf bags into her car like they weighed nothing. Did you record it? Better. The club's security cameras got it all. She's on tape lifting 50-pound bags over her. The renovation began 3 days later with the kind of orchestrated chaos that only comes with unlimited budgets and tight deadlines. Sarah had spared no expense, hiring Castellano and Associates, the same luxury landscaping firm that had designed the mayor's estate, to transform her backyard into what she privately called the perfect fraud trap. From her kitchen window, Sarah watched the crew install the foundation for what would become a stunning but strategically hazardous outdoor space. Smooth travertine pathways with subtle elevation changes. A 3-tier water feature with decorative stones positioned to create natural trip hazards. Ambient lighting that would create misleading shadows after dark. Every element had been carefully designed to look like an expensive accident waiting to happen. You sure about this, sis? Miguel asked, joining her at the window with 2 cups of coffee. You're dropping 60 grand on landscaping just to catch Karen in a lie. I'm dropping 60 grand to stop a career criminal, Sarah corrected, accepting the coffee gratefully. And if it works, I'll recover the money from Karen's other victims. Tommy connected me with 3 more families she scammed. We're talking about a class action suit worth over $500,000. Miguel's eyebrows rose. That's a hell of a lot more than your original $200,000. That's the point. Karen picked the wrong victim this time. As if summoned by their conversation, Karen appeared in her backyard, pretending to water plants while openly gawking at the construction. She'd abandoned all pretense of subtlety, positioning herself to eavesdrop on Sarah's conversations with the contractors. Sarah smiled and opened her kitchen window. Mr. Castellano, she called to the project supervisor, pitching her voice to carry across the yard. I'm concerned about liability with all these water features and elevation changes. Should I increase my homeowner's insurance? The contractor, a weathered man in his 50s who'd been briefed on Sarah's plan, played his part perfectly. Absolutely, Mrs. Martinez. These natural stone surfaces can be slippery when wet, and the multi-level design creates some unique challenges. I'd recommend at least $2 million in liability coverage. Sarah saw Karen's head snap up at the mention of the insurance amount. $2 million. To a professional fraudster, it must have sounded like winning the lottery. Of course, I'll call my agent this afternoon, Sarah replied loudly. Better safe than sorry, especially with all the foot traffic we'll have once the dinner parties start. Karen had stopped even pretending to garden, standing frozen by her fence with a watering can in one hand and naked greed written across her face. That afternoon, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her insurance agent, but when she answered, she was surprised to hear Karen's voice instead. Sarah, darling, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the neighborhood directory. Karen's tone was honey sweet, but Sarah could hear the calculation underneath. I couldn't help but notice all the lovely work being done in your backyard. Oh, hello, Karen. Yes, it's quite an undertaking. We should be finished by the end of the week. How exciting. I was wondering. Well, this might sound silly, but I was hoping you might give me a little tour once everything's complete. I'm considering some landscaping work myself, and I'd love to see what you've done. There it was. The setup. Karen was already planning her next fraud, and she'd taken the bait exactly as Sarah had hoped. I'd be delighted to show you around. Sarah replied warmly. In fact, I'm having a small housewarming party next Saturday evening to show off the new space. Why don't you come by around 7? The lighting will really showcase the water features. That sounds wonderful. I'll bring my famous spinach dip. After Karen hung up, Sarah immediately called her security company. I need the camera installation moved up. I want everything operational by Friday. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. While the landscaping crew put the finishing touches on Sarah's elaborate trap, a team of security specialists installed a network of high-definition cameras disguised as landscape lighting, decorative rocks, and garden sculptures. Every angle of the backyard would be covered, with facial recognition software and motion sensors that would activate automatically. Sarah also hired a private investigator named Rebecca Torres, a former police detective who specialized in insurance fraud cases. Rebecca spent 2 days documenting Karen's activities, following her to the country club, the grocery store, and her weekly tennis lesson. Your neighbor is living a very active lifestyle for someone claiming permanent disability, Rebecca reported, sliding a folder of photographs across Sarah's dining room table. Yesterday alone, I documented her carrying a 40-pound bag of mulch, playing 3 sets of tennis, and helping her neighbor move furniture. The photos were damning. Karen bending, lifting, running, and reaching without any sign of the debilitating back injury she claimed had ruined her life. Each image was time-stamped and GPS tagged, creating an irrefutable record of her deception. "This is perfect," Sarah said, flipping through the evidence. "But I need her to incriminate herself on my property. I need her to attempt another fraud." "Are you sure that's wise? If she's as experienced as you think, she might suspect a trap." "That's what I'm counting on. Karen's gotten away with this for years because she's careful and smart. But she's also greedy, and greed makes people take risks they shouldn't take." Friday evening, Sarah stood in her transformed backyard, surveying her handiwork. The space was genuinely beautiful. Travertine pathways wound between lush plantings, leading to a stunning 3-tier fountain surrounded by natural stone seating. Subtle lighting created an enchanting ambience while carefully concealing the security cameras. It was also a lawsuit waiting to happen. The pathway stones had been treated to maintain their natural texture, making them slightly slippery when wet. The elevation changes were just irregular enough to catch an unwary foot. The fountain spray created a fine mist that would settle on the surrounding stones, creating the perfect conditions for a believable slip and fall. Miguel arrived early to help set up for the party, whistling appreciatively as he surveyed the renovation. "I've got to hand it to you, Sarah. If I didn't know this was a trap, I'd be worried about my own safety back here." "That's the idea. Everything needs to look accidental but feel inevitable. And if Karen doesn't take the bait, then I've got $60,000 worth of beautiful landscaping and enough evidence of her other frauds to destroy her in court." Sarah checked her watch. But she'll take the bait. She can't help herself. The first guests began arriving at 6:30. Sarah had invited a carefully curated mix of neighbors, colleagues, and friends, enough people to make the party feel legitimate while ensuring plenty of witnesses for whatever Karen had planned. Karen arrived precisely at 7, carrying her promised spinach dip and wearing a flowing black dress that would photograph beautifully against the light-colored stone. She'd also brought a small purse with what appeared to be a bottle of prescription pain medication clearly visible in the side pocket, a prop designed to reinforce her injured victim persona. "Sarah, this is absolutely stunning," Karen gushed, accepting a glass of wine and surveying the backyard with the calculating eye of a professional appraiser. "You must have spent a fortune." "Worth every penny," Sarah replied, watching Karen's reaction carefully. "Though I have to admit, I'm a little nervous about liability. My insurance agent keeps warning me about these natural stone surfaces." Karen's eyes lit up with barely concealed excitement. "Oh, I'm sure it's perfectly safe. These designers know what they're doing." For the next hour, Sarah watched Karen work the party like a professional surveyor, memorizing every pathway, noting every potential hazard, and engaging other guests in conversations about Sarah's insurance coverage and the renovation costs. She was gathering intelligence for her planned fraud with the methodical precision of a military reconnaissance mission. Around 8:30, as the party reached its peak and the backyard filled with laughter and conversation, Sarah noticed Karen discreetly testing various surfaces with her foot, checking for loose stones or slippery areas. She was looking for the perfect spot to stage her fall. Sarah excused herself from a conversation with her neighbors and quietly activated the security system from her phone. Every camera was now recording, every motion sensor was armed, and the facial recognition software was locked onto Karen's features. At 9:15, as the evening wound down and guests began saying their goodbyes, Karen made her move. "Sarah, thank you for such a lovely evening," she announced loudly enough for the remaining guests to hear. "I think I'll take one more look at that gorgeous fountain before I leave." Sarah's pulse quickened. This was it. Karen walked carefully toward the fountain area, where the combination of mist and ambient lighting created the most treacherous conditions. Sarah followed at a distance, her phone recording everything while the hidden cameras captured multiple angles of Karen's approach. What happened next unfolded with the surreal precision of a choreographed performance. Karen positioned herself near the fountain's edge, directly in front of the main security camera, and began examining the stonework with exaggerated interest. She tested the ground with her foot, clearly looking for the optimal spot for her planned F. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos of a Saturday night, but Karen Whitmore commanded attention even while strapped to a gurney. Her theatrical groans of pain echoed through the corridor as she played her familiar role of the grievously injured victim, though this time the blood on her scalp and the genuine swelling in her ankle lent credibility to her performance. Sarah sat in the waiting area beside Miguel, her phone containing hours of security footage that would change everything. But as she watched the paramedics wheel Karen toward the treatment rooms, she felt an unexpected pang of guilt. Whatever Karen had done, seeing another human being in genuine pain was harder than she'd anticipated. "You're having second thoughts," Miguel observed, reading her expression with the accuracy of a lifetime spent as her brother. "She's really hurt, Miguel. I watched her planning to fake a fall, but what actually happened?" Sarah shook her head. "I never wanted anyone to get genuinely injured. Sarah, that woman has been systematically destroying families for years. Mrs. Patterson told you she might have contributed to Mr. Henderson's death. How many other people has she hurt with her lies?" Before Sarah could respond, Karen's voice rose from behind the treatment room curtain, loud enough to carry throughout the emergency department. "Nurse, I need you to document everything carefully. This was clearly a premises liability situation. The homeowner failed to maintain safe conditions, and I've suffered severe injuries as a result." Karen's voice carried the practiced authority of someone who'd navigated insurance claims many times before. "I'll need copies of all medical records for my attorney." Sarah's sympathy evaporated. Even genuinely injured, even caught in an obvious fraud attempt, Karen was already planning her next lawsuit. The woman was incapable of honesty, even when telling the truth would serve her better. "That's it," Sarah muttered, pulling out her phone. "Miguel, call David Chen. Tell him to meet us here immediately." "Sarah, it's almost midnight on a Saturday. Tell him I have evidence that will end Karen's career as a professional victim. He'll come." While Miguel made the call, Sarah scrolled through the security footage on her phone, watching Karen's failed fraud attempt from multiple angles. The cameras had captured everything: Karen's obvious reconnaissance of the property, her staged positioning near the fountain, the fake prescription bottle filled with mints, and most importantly, the moment her planned performance became a real accident. But they'd also captured something else, something Sarah hadn't noticed during the chaos of the actual event. In the moments before her fall, Karen had been recording herself with a small, concealed camera, clearly intending to document her accident for use in court. The irony was perfect. Karen had been so focused on staging her fraud that she'd accidentally created evidence of her own criminal intent. David Chen arrived 40 minutes later, looking remarkably alert for a lawyer who'd been dragged from his bed after midnight. He found Sarah and Miguel in the hospital cafeteria, where they'd retreated to avoid Karen's increasingly dramatic performance in the emergency room. "This better be good, Sarah. I was at my daughter's piano recital when Miguel called." "It's better than good." Sarah handed him her phone, cued to the beginning of the evening's footage. "It's a confession, an admission of fraud, and evidence of criminal intent all wrapped up in one convenient package." David watched in fascination as the security footage played out. Karen's calculated survey of the property, her obvious testing of surfaces, the staged positioning, the fake medication, all of it captured in high-definition detail with timestamps and GPS coordinates. "Jesus," David whispered as Karen's planned fraud became an actual accident. She was literally in the middle of committing insurance fraud when this happened. "It gets better." Sarah fast-forwarded to the moment when Karen's purse opened, spilling fake prescription medication across the stones. "Those aren't pain pills. They are breath mints." She was carrying props for her fraud. David's expression shifted from amazement to predatory satisfaction. "Sarah, this doesn't just destroy her current lawsuit against you. This could unravel every claim she's ever filed." "That's what I'm hoping. But there's more." Sarah showed him the footage of Karen's concealed camera. She was recording herself committing fraud. We have her creating evidence for a lawsuit based on a deliberately staged accident. Do you have the camera? It's probably still in her purse, but hospital security retrieved her belongings. I'm sure we can get a warrant. David leaned back in his plastic cafeteria chair, grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery. Sarah, you've just handed me the most airtight fraud case I've ever seen. Karen Whitmore isn't just going to lose her lawsuit against you, she's going to prison. What about her current injuries? She's genuinely hurt. Doesn't matter. Fraud is fraud, regardless of whether she accidentally injured herself in the process. In fact, it makes it worse. She was committing a felony when she got hurt, which means she's not entitled to any compensation whatsoever. As if summoned by their conversation, Karen's voice echoed from the emergency room, growing more strident as her pain medication began to wear off. I don't care what you think you saw. I slipped on a wet surface that wasn't properly maintained. That woman is liable for my injuries, and I intend to pursue full compensation. Sarah, David, and Miguel exchanged glances. Even faced with overwhelming evidence of her own fraud, Karen was doubling down on her lies. She's really going to do this, Miguel said with something approaching admiration. Even caught red-handed, she's going to try to sue you. Let her, David said, still scrolling through the security footage. Every word she says just makes our case stronger. Sarah, I want you to record everything she tells the hospital staff. Her own statements will be the final nail in her coffin. Sarah activated her phone's voice recorder as they approached the treatment area. Karen was holding court from her hospital bed, regaling anyone who would listen with her version of events, while a young resident attempted to examine her injuries. The pathway was clearly defective, Karen was saying, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who'd given similar speeches many times before. No warning signs, inadequate lighting, and the property owner failed to address obvious safety hazards. This is a textbook premises liability case. The resident, a tired-looking woman in her early 30s, tried to redirect the conversation to medical matters. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to focus on your injuries right now. We can discuss the circumstances later. Doctor, you need to understand the severity of this situation. I've suffered permanent damage due to someone else's negligence. My previous back injury has been severely aggravated, and I'll likely require extensive physical therapy and pain management for the rest of my life. Sarah stepped into view, causing Karen's monologue to halt mid-sentence. The two women stared at each other across the small treatment room, the air thick with unspoken accusations and barely contain hostility. How are you feeling, Karen? Sarah asked with genuine concern, though her phone continued recording every word. Karen's mask of victimhood slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculating predator underneath. I'm in excruciating pain, obviously, and I hope you've contacted your insurance company, because this is going to be expensive. Actually, I've contacted my lawyer. David, would you like to introduce yourself? David stepped forward with a predatory smile of a shark that had just scented blood in the water. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm David Chen, and I represent Ms. Martinez in the fraudulent lawsuit you filed against her 3 months ago. Karen's face went pale beneath her hospital makeup. I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing fraudulent about my claim. Really? Because I have high-definition security footage of you staging tonight's accident. I have evidence of the fake prescription medication you were carrying as props. And I have documentation of at least 6 other fraudulent claims you filed over the past 15 years. The treatment room fell silent except for the steady beeping of medical equipment. The resident looked between the 3 adults with the confused expression of someone who'd stumbled into a drama she didn't understand. Karen's voice, when she finally spoke, carried none of its usual confidence. You can't prove anything. David pulled out his tablet, queuing up the security footage. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to show you something, and then you're going to have a choice to make. The tablet screen filled with crystal clear footage of Karen testing the stone surfaces, positioning herself for her planned fall, and going through the motions of a staged accident. Her face was clearly visible, her intentions obvious, her fraud undeniable. Karen watched her own criminal performance with growing horror, her theatrical groans of pain forgotten as the reality of her situation settled in. You see, Mrs. Whitmore, David continued with clinical precision, insurance fraud is a felony in this state. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and the statute of limitations hasn't expired on any of your previous victims. You're looking at multiple felony charges, restitution to everyone you've defrauded, and potentially decades in prison. But I'm genuinely hurt. Karen protested, desperation creeping into her voice. This time it's real. Doesn't matter. You were injured while committing a felony on. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same courtroom where Karen had planned to destroy her life, watching as the bailiff led her former neighbor away in handcuffs. The orange jumpsuit was a far cry from the designer dresses Karen had worn during her depositions, and the reality of her 18-month prison sentence had stripped away the last vestiges of her manipulative charm. Judge Patricia Williams finished reading the sentencing order with the measured tone of someone who'd seen too many cases like this one. Mrs. Whitmore, you have systematically defrauded innocent families for over 15 years, stealing not just money but peace of mind, security, and in some cases, their health. Your actions represent a calculated pattern of criminal behavior that strikes at the foundation of our civil justice system. Karen stood between her two court-appointed attorneys. Her expensive legal team had abandoned her once the evidence became public, staring straight ahead with the hollow expression of someone who'd finally run out of lies to tell. The court hereby sentences you to 18 months in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution to your victims in the amount of $647,000, plus court costs and investigative fees. Sarah felt Miguel squeeze a shoulder as the number echoed through the courtroom. $647,000, the collective damage Karen had inflicted on families across 5 states. It was more than any of them had imagined when this started. Additionally, Judge Williams continued, you are permanently barred from filing any premises liability claims in this state, and your name will be entered into the National Insurance Fraud Database to prevent future schemes. As the bailiff escorted Karen toward the exit, she caught Sarah's eye for one final moment. There was no defiance left in her gaze, no calculation or manipulation, just the exhausted recognition of complete and total defeat. After the courtroom cleared, Sarah found herself standing on the courthouse steps with the group of people who'd become unlikely allies in their fight for justice. Mrs. Patterson clutched her arm with shaking hands, tears of relief streaming down her weathered cheeks. I never thought I'd live to see this day, the elderly woman whispered. That woman destroyed the Hendersons, and she would have destroyed you too if you hadn't fought back. Tommy from the country club had taken the day off work to attend the sentencing, and his normally stoic expression showed rare emotion. She cost my boss almost $100,000 over the years with her fake claims. Today feels like Christmas and my birthday rolled into one. David Chen emerged from the courthouse carrying a briefcase full of settlement documents and wearing the satisfied expression of a lawyer who just won the most clear-cut case of his career. Sarah, I've got good news and better news. The good news is that Karen's confession led to successful civil suits against her in 4 other states. The better news is that her restitution payments start next month. How much am I getting back? Your original $200,000, plus legal fees, plus your share of the punitive damages. All told, you're looking at about $350,000. Sarah felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The money would restore her financial security, but it couldn't erase the months of stress, the sleepless nights, or the violation of trust that had started this whole ordeal. What about the others? The Hendersons, the families in other states. Everyone gets made whole. Karen had significant assets hidden in various accounts. Apparently she'd been planning for the possibility of getting caught for years. We've frozen everything, and the court-appointed receiver is liquidating her properties to fund the restitution payments. Rebecca Torres, the private investigator who documented Karen's fraud, joined their group with a final folder of evidence. I wanted you to see this, she said, handing Sarah a thick manila envelope. It's Karen's complete confession. She detailed every fraud going back to 1998. Sarah opened the envelope and found herself reading a document that read like a master class in insurance fraud. Karen had meticulously planned each scheme, researching targets, studying property layouts, and perfecting her techniques over nearly 2 decades. The level of premeditation was staggering. 23 separate frauds across 5 states, Rebecca explained. She made almost $800,000 over the years, not counting the legitimate settlements she would have received anyway. She wasn't just a criminal, she was a professional. As the group dispersed, Sarah and Miguel walked slowly toward their cars, both processing the magnitude of what had just concluded. The parking garage was quiet except for the echo of their footsteps and the distant sounds of city traffic. "So what now?" Miguel asked. "You've got your money back, Karen's in prison, and justice has been served. What do you do for an encore?" Sarah considered the question as they reached her car. "I think I'm going to do something Karen would never understand." "What's that?" "Help people instead of hurting them." 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in her completely renovated backyard, but this time it wasn't a trap, it was a celebration. She'd invited every family that Karen had victimized, along with the neighbors, lawyers, and investigators who'd helped bring her to justice. The dangerous pathways had been redesigned with proper safety features. The water fountains included warning signs and slip-resistant surfaces. The lighting was bright and practical rather than misleadingly atmospheric. It was still beautiful, but now it was genuinely safe, the kind of space where people could gather without fear. Mrs. Patterson sat in a place of honor near the fountain, regaling anyone who would listen with stories of the neighborhood before Karen's reign of terror. The Henderson family had driven up from Florida for the occasion, and Mr. Henderson, despite his heart condition, looked healthier than anyone had seen him in years. "You know," he told Sarah as they watched children play safely around the water features, "the stress of that lawsuit nearly killed me. Not just the money, though that hurt, but the feeling of being helpless against someone who was obviously lying. You gave me back my faith in justice." Tommy had brought several co-workers from the country club, and they'd set up an impromptu barbecue on Sarah's deck. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that they were celebrating in the same space where Karen had planned her final fraud. As the evening wound down, David Chen approached Sarah with a legal document that would ensure Karen's story had a lasting impact beyond her prison sentence. "It's the paperwork for the Karen Whitmore Foundation," he explained, "a victim advocacy group that will help other families fight insurance fraud. Your settlement money will fund it for the first 3 years." Sarah took the document, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with it. "You think it will make a difference?" "I know it will." Karen was successful for so long because her victims felt isolated and powerless. This foundation will give them resources, legal support, and most importantly, hope. As the last guests departed, Sarah found herself alone in her backyard for the first time since the night everything changed. The space was peaceful now, free of the malevolent presence that had shadowed it for months. The fountain bubbled quietly in the background, and the safety lighting cast a warm, welcoming glow over the pathways. She thought about Karen, spending her first month in a concrete cell instead of her luxurious home. There was no satisfaction in another person suffering, but there was deep relief in knowing that no other family would endure what Karen had put them through. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Ms. Martinez, this is Jennifer Walsh in Colorado. I saw the news story about Karen Whitmore and realized she did the same thing to my family 3 years ago. Can your foundation help us?" Sarah smiled as she typed her response. "Absolutely. That's exactly why we are here." Over the following months, similar messages would arrive weekly. Families who'd been victimized by Karen or other professional fraudsters, people who'd given up hope of ever seeing justice. The foundation would help dozens of families recover stolen money and see their tormentors brought to justice. But none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that Sarah had taken something destructive and turned it into something constructive. She'd refused to let Karen's corruption poison her own character, choosing instead to build something that would help others long after Karen was forgotten. As she locked up her house and headed inside, Sarah realized that this was what real victory looked like. Not revenge, but restoration. Not just getting her own life back, but making sure others could get theirs back too. Karen Whitmore had spent years taking from others, leaving a trail of broken families and shattered trust in her wake. But in the end, her final victim had refused to be broken, and that refusal had created something far more powerful than any fraud scheme. Justice, it turned out, wasn't just about punishment. It was about making sure the damage stopped with you, and that the next person wouldn't have to face the same fight alone. Sarah turned off the backyard lights and headed to bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges but also new opportunities to help. And somewhere in a prison cell 50 miles away, Karen Whitmore would wake up to another day of consequences for choices that could never be undone. The game was over. And for once, the house had won for all the right reason.